Hi students, welcome to the next topic in the consumer behavior in practice course. This is topic 3. We jump around a bit in the manual and you'll find it in chapter 7 and specifically dealing with the perception and the learning process. In other words, how customers perceive a particular product or brand and how they have over a period of time have learned a specific behavior to create an attitude or a perception on a particular product. Like we always do at the start of a chapter is we look at the outcomes we would like to achieve. So hopefully by the end of topic 3, we'll be able to explain, or you would be able to explain, the nature of perception, illustrate the implications of the perceptual process, highlight the marketing implications of perceptions, and then in the second half of this chapter explain the nature of learning, the elements of learning, and the marketing implications of all the different learning theories that we have addressed. Now, I think all of us have probably at some stage suffered from customer fatigue. Customer fatigue is where there's a total information overload and our senses are just unsure exactly how to process everything, because I think I read an article recently where it was implied that you or the customer receives more than 1,000 messages of information in a day as a result of all the social platforms that's available. Now, what makes it very difficult for the marketer is that because of this overload, this mass information that is received. I know, I mean, early morning you're still okay when you're getting WhatsApps and SMSs, and but sort of midday, I mean, almost, guys, how did you get my number? I mean, you are flooded with information, and a lot of them is not relevant to you, and therefore customers only pay attention to some of the stimuli. Let's say, for instance, you work at a biltong shop. I am always amazed with the smell of the biltong when I walk into one of those biltong shops. I think if you work there every day, you don't smell it anymore. If you work in one of these shops that sell these scented candles and soaps, it's always, when you walk past a shop like that in a mall, it's always very intriguing, all the smells, and it's normally very it's usually only good smells. But I think if you work there every day, you sort of don't pick up on it anymore. So yes, we only pay, the customer only starts paying attention to some of the stimuli, and they also assign their own meanings to a particular message. So when a message is sent out by a marketer about a product or a brand, very often, because of the information overload, the consumer sort of jumps a few steps in their decision-making process, and they go back to what they have experienced in the past and what they've learned about this product in the past through own experience, and that's the ones that they try to, that's the sort of a default go-to decision that they then make, and this is the problem for marketers, because they often don't get the message across to the customer in the way it was intended. So the way in which the consumer processes the information is not in the same manner that it was actually intended by the marketer. And what's the nature of perception? Or in other words, let's define perception. It's seen as the process by which people select, organize, and interpret stimuli, that's our senses, to form a meaningful picture of the world through either one of the senses of sight, sound, smell, touch, and taste. Another way of putting it is that it's the way in which the consumer who intends to buy a product interpret or give meaning to the world around them. Now, this process, and we'll see this in the perceptual process when we get to that later in the chapter, involves that the individual is exposed to a stimuli, that the stimulus attracts the attention of the customer, that the customer then interprets the stimuli based on certain criteria, and then finally that the customer then responds to the stimulus in a particular way, preferably a positive way, which leads to a sale. Now, people are like computers, and like computers go through different stages of processing information. Customers also go through different process with different steps or stages when they process the information that they have received through the stimuli of one of their senses. We can therefore say that perception could be or is selective, subjective, and also based on personal experience. Let's look at each of these individually. What does it mean if we say that perception is selective? Well, we've already determined that customers on a daily basis are confronted with too much information. There's a complete information overload. And as a result of that, they tend to only attend to a very small percentage of all this information. So the selectivity on which of these messages they actually would attend to is called a perceptual defense. In other words, to ensure that we sort of shortlist the options that we are considering. We process and select the specific messages that we at that stage have the greatest need for. The consumer then decides which message they will pay attention to and which message they will react to. I can use an example, for instance. If you just bought a house, you would pay less attention to television commercials, radio commercials, or any other form of advertisement regarding property for sale, because your need has been recently satisfied. So it's not that important, and therefore that will be one of the messages that you will not attend to in all the messages that you receive. Perception is furthermore also subjective. It's been a very popular play on different platforms in South Africa. Defending the Caveman, which is sort of based on the book by John Gray, titled Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus, just to indicate how different the two genders are. So when we deal with the subjectivity of perception, we have to realize that our personal, individual, subjective factors now also start playing a role. In other words, people see and hear what they're interested in because of what they are, what they believe in, and what their values are. Let's look at that image on the left-hand side of the screen. Women see a certain color where men see a different color. And you've often heard conversations, or maybe you've engaged in a conversation as well, where your girlfriend or your wife or your husband or your boyfriend has said to you, you know what, can you see that? It's just around there by that blue that, that blue building over there, and you think blue. I don't see blue. For me, it's more sort of a turquoise. Now, turquoise is very close to blue, but again, it's how people see it, and we see it differently because of differences in our personalities. Let's look at a few more images just to prove the point, and also to have a bit of a laugh. We all know, and we've seen those images on the right hand side of the screen. Men always see themselves as better than they are, where women always see themselves worse than they are. Not always, but I think we're generalizing here, but I'm generalizing here. But it's often the case. I mean, you've heard very often, does this gene make me look fat? No, the mirror makes you look fat. So we definitely see ourselves different in the mirror. And as a result of that, we often, or that is brought into the process. And we have to remember that as marketers, that because men and women see themselves differently, how we perceive a particular product or brand, or if it would enhance our image, or it would negatively affect our image, we will make a decision. I'm going to have two more images on this particular slide. It's obviously one more for the male students. On the left hand side, you'll see the perfect female body according to women, and on the right hand side, the perfect female body according to men. It's quite interesting to have a look at the different people that they have used in combining, or that they've combined to make up those two seemingly perfect images. I'm going to go to the next screen just to also make sure that the females are not feeling left out. On the left hand side again, the perfect male body according to women, and the opposite, the perfect male body according to men on the right hand side. If you look at these two slides, it'll be interesting when we have our Zoom session later in the week to discuss and see if this is also how you perceive it to be or not. We also have identified that perception is based on the individual's frame of reference. For somebody who grows up in a particular environment where they are not exposed to certain technology, that is just their world. They don't know better. And then often when they actually are exposed to a different world, new options become available. Initially it's confusing, and then they adapt accordingly. So the perceptions of an individual is very much based on their experiences. They all give different meanings to certain statements and certain messages, and customers will sometimes add a bit to the meaning, or sometimes they'll take away. It's like telling a story. When I tell you the story, you get the information, but if you tell it to somebody else, some of the information gets lost in translation, and by the fifth time the person repeats that story and it returns to you, it's a complete different story that you have told initially. It's almost like making a photocopy of an original. If you make a photocopy of the original every time, it will be a good quality copy. If you make a photocopy of the original and then make a copy of the copy and repeat the process and make a copy of the copy, eventually you end up with a blank page. For instance, you go to a specific hairdresser to have your hair cut. You've never had a bad experience. A friend of you indicates that they've gone there as well and they've had a horrible experience the last time. You are not going to necessarily now cancel your next appointment. You are still going to go because you've never had a bad experience. If your next experience, however, is a bad one, you might start reconsidering to change hairdressers. We'll break, and this is the end of the first video in this series on perception and learning. When we return, we will continue to look at specifically the steps and the stages of the perceptual process.